Hi friends, I hope you are doing well. In this video, I will show you my more commonly used techniques to put down color and also add detail to my pieces. So without further ado, let's go through the 3 most common techniques that I use to place color. The first one is, I guess I would call it a free-form blob technique. And I use this to place large washes of color onto my pieces. I usually do this with a textured brush, but you can of course use this with a untextured brush. So what do I mean by textured brushes? What I mean is something like chalk, for example, that when you draw with it, comes with a texture. Whereas something like a hard airbrush, for example, has minimal to no texture, so it looks more like a solid block of color. I will demonstrate this technique with a watercolor brush. So as you can see, I am just very roughly placing down the color where I want it, and it doesn't have to be super refined. It is called the freeform blob technique for a reason. Here, you might like to take an eraser and then clean up some of the edges, for example, to get just a little bit more refinement, especially on these smaller details like the hair wispies. And yeah, that's about that. I find that this technique is really nice to quickly get color onto your piece, but also introduce texture. I also find that if you don't color within the lines, it sometimes can add quite a bit of charm to the piece. There you have it. That's the first technique. The second technique that I tend to use a lot is like a pencil scratching technique. I use this a lot to add texture and to build color and indicate form and direction. I will show you what I mean by this in a little bit. And basically what I do is I grab a brush that mimics a pen or a pencil and I color it in as I would if I was using an actual pen or pencil. So right now I have grabbed a 6B pencil brush and I'm just gonna scratch in the color. Now when I do this, I try to follow the form or the shape of whatever I'm coloring it in. So here I am coloring in according to the direction of the hair flow, for example. So I'm not gonna color it in up and down just like that, but I will color it in like this, just to mimic hair flow, and I find that this really helps guide the eye. There you go. So of course you could color everything up and down like this, but I think the nice thing about this technique is that you can really help to build up the form using the directions of your pen scratches, your strokes, your pen strokes. Plus I think it's really nice that this technique adds quite a lot of texture. And just like that, we're done. And the next technique I call a selected area technique, and I use this to achieve edges that are a little bit more defined. This technique, or at least how I understand it, draws quite a lot from how manga artists used to use screens. So by the same token, I would usually use this technique with halftone brushes or very, very, very textured brushes. So here I've selected the selection tool, and I'm just gonna mark out the areas where I want color to be. And then I go ahead and grab my halftone brush and I place in the color. One nice thing about this technique is that now that it's limited to this one specific area that you have selected, you can go ahead and brush on more color and build on top of that. So for example, with the rose, I want to add a bit more dimension, and I'm going to keep this selected area and I'm just going to paint over where I want a little bit more color with a thicker halftone brush. I'm going to do the same with the leaf now. And there you have it, my most often used techniques to color in my pieces. I use these techniques to color, but I also use them to add detail. And the details that I like to add are shading or shadows, and also colored line art. And that's what I'm gonna take you through next. So firstly, shading or adding shadows. Let me just place down a wash of color and then I will proceed to show you how I shade. So for shading, I always add in an extra layer, and then I take the same color that I used before and I just layer it on there. What this does is that it makes that area more opaque, basically creating contrast, and that's what shading is all about. You add contrast so that it helps to define the shape. I will say that this works for brushes that are a little bit more translucent to begin with so that you can actually layer on top of them. Now another technique that I like to use is to put my shadow layer on multiply. What this does is it takes whatever's on this layer and multiplies it with whatever is below it. So I'm just going to hide my previous shading layer and then I'm going to color on this one. So as you can see here, it not only makes the area that you're coloring in now more opaque, but it makes the color darker. And that goes a long way when you're trying to create more contrast. There we go. And now for colored line art. So let me again place down some color. This time I'm going to use the selected area technique. So right now my line art is in black and I want to change the color. What I do is I go to my line art layer and then I put it on alpha lock. So you can do this by just tapping it and then putting it on alpha lock, or you could use the shortcut of swiping to the right with 2 fingers. And when you see this checkered pattern at the back, that's basically indicating that it is now on alpha lock. And what this does is that it locks all of the empty pixels and it keeps it that way. So from now on, whatever you do to this layer is limited to the pixels that already have color on them. So now I'm going to color in the line art. So for example, with the hair tie, I'm not a big fan of how contrasting the black is on this yellow. So then I take a brush, take an orange, and I color it in where I want the black to now be orange. I can do the same with the hair. Maybe to a darker pink instead of the black. And then maybe we change the face from black to a light brown. There you go. One thing I really like to add on to this technique is that I would like to take the line art layer and then I make it onto multiply mode. And this I find really helps to make the line art and the colors a little bit more cohesive, especially if you color the line art with the same color that you used to color in the element itself. So with the rose, I'm gonna color in the line art with the same tone of pink that I used for the flower itself. And with multiply mode, that's just gonna very nicely multiply on top and it makes it more cohesive. I do the same with the leaves. Sometimes I might take a darker color and then color in the line art where, for example, shadows might be, or maybe just to add a little bit more texture or shading. So for example, with the flower, I've now taken this darker pink and then I color in some areas of the rose itself. I find that this helps the line art not to be so flat. Ta-da! So yeah, these are really my most So as a bonus, sometimes I do like to add highlights, and I do this by taking a somewhat off-white color and then just placing the highlight where I want them to be. And there you have it. These are really my most often used techniques when it comes to creating any of my pieces. I tend to mix and match them depending on the effect that I want to achieve. There is actually a lot of trial and error when it comes to creating my pieces, and most of the time I'm just experimenting with what works and what doesn't, and working my way, or like inching my way towards the piece that I want to create. And that's the fun of it, just experimenting and finding out what works for you. So yeah, I hope that this video has been helpful, maybe on your journey of experimenting and exploring your own art. And with that, I'll see you in the next video. Bye!